I only noticed the elevator because I was tired of the stairs. Dempsey and Co. Rare Books, wedged like a limestone cliff into the edge of downtown, was one of those bookstores that used its age as both marketing and threat. Staircases corkscrewed without warning, mezzanines floated in dim air, and entire shelves might be reachable only by leaning over a banister with one foot braced on a ladder rung. I had already spent 2 hours wrangling with a cantankerous shelf labeled ephemera, possibly dangerous, and the thought of climbing again to the top floor map room made my knees lurch. So when I saw the brass-grated elevator, an Art Deco cage I'd never noticed before, I pressed the call button without hesitation. A bell chimed, the doors sighed apart, and a bored operator in a gray waistcoat tipped his cap at me. People under 30 don't expect elevator operators to exist at all, much less silently appear inside bookstores. I offered a nervous "sixth, please," stepped in, and felt the car begin its steady climb. The operator didn't touch the panel. There was nothing to touch. The buttons were long gone, replaced by a vertical brass slot polished to mirror brightness. "You know," I said, hunting for small talk, "I come here every week and never saw this lift." The operator's eyes met mine in the mirror, pale and flickering like candlelight. "The elevator," he said, "sees you when you see it." All right, I thought, another bookstore eccentric. I decided silence was the better part of politeness. The cage rattled, gears clanked, and numbers painted on the shaft's wall slid downward. 3, 4, 5, then a blank space. The car ground to a halt. When the doors rolled back, I expected the 6th floor's familiar patchwork rugs and antique globes. Instead, I faced a corridor lit by dull sconces and painted the color of damp parchment. No sign announced where I was, no bustle of customers stole from the aisles, only a hush so absolute it felt baked into the air. "Is this," I began, "the floor between?" the operator supplied. "Between what?" He didn't answer. A cold shiver steadied me. I told myself I could always step back into the elevator, but my feet drifted forward as though snagged by fishhooks. The operator saluted with 2 fingers and the doors closed behind me, leaving me alone. The corridor narrowed into a single room shaped like an octagon. Shelves bulged from every wall, each bearing a single row of leather-bound books. They were identical. Black spines, no titles, no author names, only a number embossed at the bottom in tarnished silver. On a waist-high island stood a lectern and an open volume. A green banker's lamp flickered overhead. Curiosity, the coal that always kept me rummaging in dusty shops, flared. I approached the lectern. The book lay splayed to a page, half blank, half densely covered in a crisp serif font. Ms. Robbins' site time of arrival, 1:42 p.m. Final moment, 3:07 p.m. Cause, compression of cervical vertebrae after fall from ladder in occult reference. The prose continued, describing in calm detail how Miss Spire, seeking a first mission Yates, would climb a too stable-looking ladder, reach too far left, and slip. Her neck would break instantly. Between 2 shelves smelling of cedar and dust, there was even a notation about the last word she would speak. "Oh." I slammed the book shut. The sound ricocheted against the octagonal walls. When the echoes fell away, the silence seemed twice as thick. I should have fled right then, barged down the hall, smashed the call button, demanded the operator drop me at a floor containing living, undoomed people. But I am a dealer in surprising texts. Appalled fascination forced my eyes back to the spines. I pulled a random volume marked 642. The page opened to Duncan Hale time of arrival, 3:20 p.m. Final moment, 3:22 p.m. Cause ruptured berry aneurysm while asking the clerk about antique chess sets. 2 minutes between walking through the door and collapsing by the front register. The handwriting perfect prose spared no kindness. He noted which clerk. Callie, the grad student with a septum piercing, would scream his name twice, then forget it forever. My stomach flopped. There were easily 1,000 books in the octagon. The numbers on the spines, I realized, weren't sequential, at least not in any order I recognized. Some wore 2 digits, some 4, some none at all. A section near the floor bore spines embossed with parentheses, as though the numbers had been erased. Breathing through my nose, I crouched and drew a slim parenthesis-marked volume. At first I saw only blank pages. Then ink seeped up, businesslike, from the paper's fibers, forming tidy lines. Claire Mara. Time of arrival, 2:56 p.m. Final moment, 5:11 p.m. Cause, myocardial infarction induced by accelerated anxiety after reading prophetic texts. My arms prickled electric. My own name first, middle, legal last, glowed as if the page had been waiting for the heat of my gaze. I read on, despite a waterfall of pulse in my ears. It described me kneeling, exactly as I was while I read a book describing the very act. It further reported that at 3:04 p.m., I would close this volume, stand, and pace 23 steps clockwise. At 3:49, I would attempt to leave, find the elevator gone, and my chest would tighten steadily until 5:11, when my heart would fail. My last breath, it assured, would taste of graphite and worn leather. Reflex slammed the book shut. A squeak clawed up my throat. I counted the seconds. 3:04 lay minutes away. With the calm of an athlete hearing their own bones crack, I slid the volume back. Then I bolted for the corridor. The hallway, which had seemed short, now stretched like a bad dream. Every lamp pooled too little light. When I reached the elevator alcove, the call button was missing. No brass, no wired outline, only smooth plaster. I hammered the wall anyway. Nothing answered. At least pace counterclockwise, I muttered, haunting myself. The book had predicted clockwise. Superstition, adrenaline, raw fear, whatever drove me. I began walking in tight counterclockwise circles, whispering numbers. 1, 2, 3. Reach 23 and break the script. As I looped, shells breathed onto the corridor's walls, inching outward until each pass brushed my shoulders. My vision tunneled. On the 17th circle, a door appeared, a faded green panel propped half open. The moment I saw it, I stumbled inside. I found a reading room no bigger than a gourmet pantry, its sole decoration, a table stacked with 5 books, their spines blank but for names I recognized. Customers stopped, people I'd chatted with not 30 minutes earlier. On the top lay one labeled Callie Stone. I thought of the septum ring, the bright laugh. I also remembered the aneurysm victim's account mentioning her. The timeline was impossible. Duncan Hale's death would occur at 3:22. My clock and the wall's grandfather clock proclaimed 3:17. I snatched Callie's book. The text formed quickly, as if hurrying to be read. Callie Stone. Time of arrival, 10:09 a.m. Final moment, 3:22 p.m. Cause, blunt force trauma to skull by falling globe displaced during customer seizure. Seizure, not aneurysm. 2 deaths for the price of 1. The snapshot widened. I pictured a globe of the Eastern Empire perched on its iron rod, teetering, when some stricken stranger slammed against its stand. Kaleidoscopic dread whirled. I didn't know Duncan Hale, but I could see them both going down in the same terrible moment. Fate braided with economy. I needed to warn her, warn them all. The trick lay in leaving this nowhere floor. I shoved Callie's volume under my arm and turned, only to jump. The elevator operator now stood in the doorway, waistcoat spotless, hat brim low. "Return the property," he said quietly. "These are people," I barked. My voice shocked me, loud, wild, not mine. "Their futures." He bowed the tip of his head. "Precisely, proprietary futures. You can't just... You're consigning them to die." One long finger lifted as if to hush a toddler. "Consignment requires consent. We perform only narration." Every argument I had, free will, ethics, human decency, slid off him like daylight off oil. I measured the distance from me to the door. If I ducked, maybe I could shoulder past. "You're allowed to leave," he said, reading the calculation in my eyes. "But the book stays. If you cling to it, you remain." My arms tightened, a reflex deeper than fear. Without thinking, I cracked Callie's book one more time. The words blurred, rearranged like blackbirds reflocking. Final moment. 3:29 p.m. C. Cause: hemorrhagic shock following deep laceration to palm from shattered globe during attempt to help seizing customer. I blinked. 7 minutes later now, new cause. Because I held the book? Because I interfered? The operator sighed. Mutable until read, mutable until fixed. The line between help and harm is narrow. He stepped forward. Hand it over. I looked him dead on. Take it, I said. And she dies at 22 or 29, whichever suits your ledger. I forced my breathing slow. What happens if the book burns? Nothing here burns, he said, patient as granite. Bleeds, then. Before he could guess my intent, I jammed the book's bottom edge against the serrated brass corner of the table. The leather tore, pages shivered loose. A red stain bloomed where the edge nicked my thumb, a drop of ordinary blood. The operator's pupils shrank. Sharp objects are forbidden. Guess your rules mutated, I replied. I flicked scarlet spots onto Callie's page. Where they landed, letters dissolved, holes chewing through the sentences. At once, the entire paragraph rearranged again. Final moment. Readacted cause. Readacted. The page turned ghostly. The book exhaled a sigh, as though tired. My skin pebbled. I wasn't sure whether I'd saved Callie or deleted her, but uncertainty beat certitude of death. The operator no longer looked bored. He extended a hand, palm up, a gesture part plea, part command. Miss Bennett. Damage here rebounds outward. Release the ledger. Of course. Each volume a ledger of one life inside the store. Break enough ledgers and the accounting fails. Good, I wanted to yell. Let the accounting fail. Instead, I wheeled past him. He tried to grab my forearm. The wet leather slid, and he missed. I bolted down the corridor, hugging Callie's half-erased book. The octagon loomed ahead. I dove in and yanked volumes at random, smearing my blood across spines still cool from neglect. Names I knew, names I didn't. With each streak, entries dissolved like chalk in rain. Redacted, redacted, redacted. Some pages responded not at all. Others spasmed, printing new fates that flickered and vanished. A distant bell tolled 3:20 closing on the aneurysm's original hour. The operator strode into the octagon, joined by two more functionaries, women in ash-gray skirts. They didn't run. Inevitability never does. My lungs blazed. I backed until my shoulders hit the central lectern. I imagined an avalanche of them prying the book from me, wiping my blood away, rewriting everything. The ledger room would close, the elevator reappear, the day unfold as originally inked. All my violence negligible, unless I rewrote my own page. I whipped out the slim parenthesis volume with my name. It opened by itself, ready, the line about myocardial infarction gleaming. I pressed my bleeding thumb onto the sentence. Pain flashed, paper cut, deeper than felt fair. Ink shattered around the print, text curved, swarmed, re-knit into something spare. Claire Mara Bennett, time of arrival, 2:56 p.m. Final moment, unresolved. Cause, inscription in progress. The operator halted. The two gray women held their breath, eyes luminous with unease. Your fate is now an open loop, he said. Luke's cut others. Return the volumes. Or what? My voice quavered. You'll write me out? He inclined his head. Your inscription is your own, but remove it from this room and the tension will snap. Behind him, the walls vibrated, shelves blurred like a lens losing focus. Somewhere far off, the store's ambient murmur erupted, shouts, a crash, the thud of falling wood. Maybe the globe struck. Maybe it missed. A theory speared me. The books weren't prophecies. They were instructions, retroactively enforced. Break the instructions, and possibilities proliferated. I pictured the narrative of Duncan Hale swelling or shrinking depending on what the operators enforced. I clutched my ledger and Callie's shredded one. I'll take them upstairs. See if your world survives. A tremor crossed his stillness. Behind decorum, fear glimmered. Not for himself, for the system. "Miss Bennet," he said, and the plea finally surfaced. "Uncertainty is crueler than death. Let us fix the line." "Maybe." I stepped sideways toward the corridor. Light strobed, spasmodic. The distance between walls oscillated, narrow, wide, narrow. Every step felt like wading through syrup spiked with static. "You may live endless fugues," he warned. "No moment will congeal, no story complete. People need endings. People need choices," I snapped. The lamps along the hall popped, showering sparks that died mid-air. Darkness colonized behind me, but ahead, the elevator doors glowed faintly. Callie's name throbbed inside my coat like a second heartbeat. Then a scream cut through the ceiling. Female, not Callie Deeper. A man shouted for help. Glass shattered. I broke into a run, leaping across wobbling floorboards that hadn't wobbled before. The octagon behind me roared like surf. The operator did not follow. Perhaps the ledger room required guardianship lest everything collapse. At the elevator, the brass grate hung open, the cage waiting. No operator inside. I lunged, jabbed the panel. Buttons had returned. Tiny white porcelain circles. G for ground blinked receptive. Doors shuddered closed. As the lift descended, something inside me rose. A realization that the books, actively policed, had kept the bookstore's chaos a million ungoverned hazards within calculable bounds. Remove the police and entropy got extravagant. Lives could end in brand new ways, sooner or later. Or skip ending entirely but drift without shape. Was that better? Unanswerable. The operator had called uncertainty cruel, yet cruelty isn't always immoral. Sometimes it's a price. The car stopped at floor 6. I almost stayed put, but a groan overhead urged me out. Lights flickered, revealing aisles torn open, volumes spilled like guts. Somewhere a sprinkler hissed. Customers milled, bewildered but alive. I spotted Callie near the register, crouching beside a customer whose left arm jerked violently. Seizure in progress, I realized. The globe above them swayed. I sprinted. "Move the globe!" I roared. People stared, slow as dripped tar. I shoved past, caught the iron stand, and wedged my shoulder against it as the seizure's jerks banged the stand's leg. The Eastern Empire globe teetered, but did not drop. Callie dragged the convulsing man away. Someone dragged emergency services. When the spasm ended, the man breathed raggedly, but breathed. Callie pressed gauze torn from her apron over a cut on her own palm. Blood seeped, not gouting. She stared at me. "Claire? You're bleeding too." I looked. The thumb cut oozed calmly. My heart whammed, but regular. Time? 3:30 by the cracked wall clock. Past both predicted ends. We were alive. Sirens wailed through the front doors. Clerks guided paramedics. Ordinary chaos reclaimed the afternoon. I slipped back toward the elevator. The grate stood ajar, the panel blank. No floor numbers, no lights. A sign newly tacked read, "Out of service." I didn't know whether the unlisted floor still existed. I did know 2 ledgers sat under my arm, heavy as newborn planets. Outside, late daylight painted the street. I stepped into it, feeling the shift, like opening a book whose pages you'll never finish. Above the bookstore, windows reflected sky, nothing moving behind the glass. A breeze lifted the hair at my neck. Possibility smelled of rain and old ink. I pulled Callie's ledger, its torn binding fluttering. The title space was blank now, no letters visible. I opened to the first page. It was as white as a sail. My own ledger remained half-written. Inscription in progress. Maybe it always would be. I could spend years avoiding pens and knives, elevators and globes, or I could live reckless and write on purpose. Wasn't that what we do anyway, every day, minus the printed reminders? Traffic muttered. Pedestrians passed, unaware that just above them hung a roomful of erased futures. I held both books over a sidewalk grate. The city's updraft tugged at the pages. I hesitated. Some part of me wanted to keep them. Proof that the future had once pretended to be certain. But certainty, I'd learned, was a cage, so I let go. Sheets scattered like startled pigeons, whirling into the twilight. Inkless, They were harmless unless someone decided to write on them. I turned, heart thrumming, and walked away, composing my next line with every step, already eager to read what it would say when I looked back. Or better, never looked back at all.